Today's sermon is not a sermon at all. Instead, we're going to be doing a workshop which will be dealing with gender and sexuality issues. This is part of our affirming process. As you know, that over the next 18 months, we'll be looking at all the ways in which we can become a more explicitly open and welcoming church to all who would like to be here. This includes those who are differently able physically, people with mental health challenges, people of all races, people of all sexualities and genders. The affirming process takes time because all of us harbor ideas and attitudes which we've inherited from society, which cause us to be exclusionary and think that some people belong and other people don't. The affirming process is an opportunity to drag some of those ideas which we've inherited into the light, so we can look at them, see that we have them, and then set them aside, so that we can be genuinely open to anyone who walks into our doors. This process is also important for us, for those of us who are already here, because there may be those of us who have aspects of our identity which we haven't wanted to be entirely open about because we were afraid that we might be judged. So this affirming process takes time, and we're going to take that time over the next 18 months or so. And it takes some education. So today we're going to focus on educating ourselves about one part of the affirming process, which is about gender and sexuality. To do this, we have created a little video that you're going to see in a few minutes. It portrays a situation which I think many of us will be in the next month or so, which is a family getting together for Christmas and planning out who's going to sit where, and what you can call people and what you can't call people. And I'd like to give a shout out to an event and people who are participating in this. The young woman is my daughter, Gail. We were graciously granted a location by these wonderful folks down here, Doug Steiner and his wife, Jasmine, and Martha King will be the one whose face will be all contorted as she makes every mistake in the book. So please forgive her in advance. It's not really her. I wrote the words that many of her. Oh, and Jerry, I'm sorry, yes. And Jerry will be there at the end too. And Jerry comes across particularly bad. To help us understand all the various terms and definitions that you're going to hear in the video, we've invited Rachel Clark to be here with us. Rachel, okay. I'm going to introduce you for a second. Rachel will be here to serve as a presenter and moderator of the discussion that we'll have after the video. Rachel is a Toronto-based trans activist who's been active in the Liberal Party and who also works at the Toronto Dominion Bank as a manager of tech equipment. And you may recognize Rachel because she ends up on the news quite a bit when people need panelists to speak about trans issues.
Yeah, I'm an F-level celebrity. I'm an F-level celebrity. I think this is on.
Okay, just turn the message.
Hi, can you hear me?
There's two. Oh, you did?
See, I did them both. Sorry.
No. Hold over your head.
Tell them I said I was an F-level celebrity.
Rachel says she's an F-level celebrity. Rachel also recently graduated from Emmanuel College with a Master in Theological Studies, which is how we met. We've taken a bunch of classes together. So when we were trying to figure out, well, who could moderate this, Rachel was the obvious choice. So I'm really glad that you're here. Thank you. So before we watch the video, though, I'd like to give Rachel a chance to introduce herself. So come on.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Rachel Clark. I have been a trans activist for about a decade now. The reason that oh, there we go. Much better, right? I can hear myself now. The reason that I think it's important to start having this conversation, I just wanted, you don't have to raise your hand, but I just wanted to ask the audience here if anyone's actually ever met a trans person before. Yeah, wow, that's great. If you haven't, you've met one now. I'm a trans person. I was born in the 1960s. I probably knew in 1972 or 3 that something was not exactly right with how I was being presented to the world and how I felt about myself. But you have to understand, back in 1970, there wasn't really a word for people like me. And in fact, coming out and saying that you were a trans person back then would have been a very dangerous thing to do indeed, because you probably either would have been sent away from your family and friends, or put on very high doses of medication that you didn't need, or worse. The outcomes for trans people weren't very good. So, like a lot of people, just like me, I didn't say anything about who I was as a person. So I think that I lived with this fact that I was trying to be a person who I wasn't for 38 years of my life. I never understood what it was like to be male. Even though I had a male body, it didn't make sense to me. I couldn't communicate with other people. I was deeply depressed and sad. Life was very, very difficult indeed. When I was around 40 years old, I went to my doctor, and the doctor told me that if I didn't come out, I was going to die. I guess that was a pretty big wake-up call for me, because I didn't know what that meant. What does it mean to come out? What does that mean for me? And she said, well, I'm going to help you through it. And the process was very, very difficult and challenging. It's not a surprise to me that around the world, since we started keeping track of these things in 2008, that over 3,300 trans people have been murdered in this world. And the reason that's happening is not because they're involved in illicit trade, or they've done anything wrong, or they're bad people. It's happening simply because they identify as a transgender person. This year, over 25 people in the United States have been killed because they're trans people. It is a very tragic and awful situation, and I knew 10 years ago that I wasn't going to let any kid grow up like I did and not have a chance to express who they are. We have to understand. I talk to a lot of people, and they say to me, well, this transgender thing, it's all new. It's not new. The problem is, in 1972 or 3, when I knew that I was a trans person, there was no words for being transgender. You couldn't put a word around it, but now we have words to use to talk to people about what gender identity and gender expression is. I am very pleased to say that my trans journey, although it's difficult, I am a more happy, well-adjusted, well-rounded person than I've ever been. I give a lot back to my community. I'm a technical delivery manager at TD Bank, which Stephen told you about. I helped to build the e-transfer system. So I'm on the team that builds e-transfer. For those of you who send money between one another, I helped to build that system. So things worked out for me. But the reason I'm here to talk is I want to use the privilege that I have to tell you that things aren't easy for every trans person. We're still vastly underemployed, still have trouble accessing healthcare, still have trouble getting housing. And I'm hoping that through the education that we're going to give you today, although very brief, will help to gain some more understanding about the trans community. So Stephen, can you roll the wonderful video?
Hi, Elizabeth.
What you doing?
I'm planning Christmas dinner. We have 2 vegans. Your aunt is gluten-free, and your father thinks that dairy is his worst issue.
One of his issues.
Yeah, but everyone else is normal.
Mom.
Well, fine. Omnivores. The point is that I have the food figured out, and now I have to figure out the seating. So I know where I want to sit. I want to sit here closest to the kitchen.
Which means Dad will sit in his usual spot.
Yeah, so that's good, because then he won't be allowed in the kitchen. Now, your grandparents are going to want to sit next to each other, so we'll put them in their normal spots.
So where do Barb and I sit then?
Well, do you want to sit next to her or apart from her?
You mean next to them or apart from them?
What, you mean your grandparents? You want to sit next to your grandparents?
No, Barbara's pronoun is them. They don't identify as either male or female, so Barb goes by them.
That is so queer.
Now you're getting it.
Well, you don't mind if I call her, them queer?
No, so a lot of people who don't identify with the heteronormative straight genders and sexualities will go by queer. Barb and I feel like the term suits us, and so Barb and I are both queer. And I think we should sit across from each other, which I think works. Okay, who's next?
So, your brother Trevor is next.
You mean my sister Sarah?
Did I call him Trevor?
Yeah, you called her him, and you used her dead name. You have to get this right, Mom, or Sarah's gonna feel really uncomfortable the whole time, and Christmas is already difficult enough as it is.
I know, I'm trying so hard. It's just, I'm so used to calling her him. Here, give me that. I better give Sarah a new card. And then I'll write Sarah.
Okay, good, because this really matters, Mom. So where do you want her to sit?
Is she bringing her boyfriend?
Oh, as of a couple of minutes ago, yes. Oscar is coming to dinner.
Oh, terrific. I was really hoping he would. He's such a nice young man.
See, you can do this.
What do you mean?
Well, you got all the pronouns right with Oscar.
Well, why would I? He's just a normal straight man.
Well, yeah, but Oscar's transgender too, and you used all his pronouns correctly.
Oscar's transgender? I had no idea. I thought he was just a normal man.
You mean you thought that he was a cisgendered man?
No, I didn't think he was anyone's sister.
No, so cisgender means that the gender you were assigned with birth corresponds with your biological gender. So you're a cisgender woman because you were assigned female at birth, and that corresponds with your biology.
So that means Oscar was born a woman. I never would have guessed. And did he...
Okay, Mom, you can never ask that. Nobody asks you about your genitals, so you should really just leave it alone for everybody else. Where should they sit?
Well, Sarah can sit... No, Oscar can sit next to Dad.
Okay.
And Sarah can sit next to Oscar.
Yeah, that works. That just leaves Uncle Frank and Aunt Ellen.
And Susan. Susan is coming too.
Wow, Uncle Frank is bringing his girlfriend. I'm just amazed that Aunt Ellen's even letting him come to Christmas dinner at all after the split. She doesn't mind his girlfriend coming too?
I know, and it was her call. And she says they all are nice to each other, and they've even been together at the house.
Wow, maybe they're poly.
Wait, who's Polly? Are they inviting someone named Polly?
No, I mean poly is short for polyamorous. So maybe they're all in a relationship where Aunt Ellen loves Susan as much as Uncle Frank loves Susan.
Well, let's just put them in the remaining spots.
That works.
And we are done.
Nice, awesome.
Hello, little ladies. How goes the dinner planning? Listen, I just got a text from my brother, and it turns out he's available for Christmas dinner. Can he come over?
Oh no.
So that's a pretty complicated situation, I would say. But it's a really important conversation to have. I just wanted to kind of explain some of the terms that were used in the video. Thank you, Stephen. If you look on the screen, you'll see you heard some pronouns. So pronouns are how you identify yourself. So my pronouns are she and her and hers. But all of you use pronouns, him or her, them, he, she, or they. I think what's kind of new for people is using the pronouns they. They're typically used for people who don't identify as either male or female. Just don't want to be defined as a gender role, and the federal government actually just recently allowed people to put their gender on passport documents and birth certificates, which is a wonderful thing. And it's kind of hard to get used to at first, right? Because we say, hi, how are you? And if they appear, if their gender expression appears to be female, we might say, she's so great. But they really may correct you and say, no, my pronoun is them. If you think about it, we use this all the time. I think in the Bible, the word they referring to somebody is used 9,000 times. So they do this. How do you feel about them? They're great. So it's actually something once you are able to do, is very kind of easy to do. I have lots of friends who use they and them pronouns, and it even takes me a little while. The best thing to know is if you make a mistake, just apologize and work towards it. The worst thing to do is to make a mistake and continue to do it on purpose because you feel like you're being self-righteous in doing it. It's not fair to people who you're speaking with. It's disrespectful. So there's that. Should we see the next slide? Queer. How many people have used this word as a slur? Yeah, it's okay. Queer is a word that, yes, back in the early 70s, 60s, and 50s was used as a slur towards homosexuals, especially. The community itself is trying to take this word back. The problem is, I think, that when people who aren't in the LGBT community, sometimes they'll see letters for the LGBT community that are 18 letters long, you know, LGBTQ2QS+, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that especially our younger generation now is just trying to reclaim this word to just say, we're part of the LGBT spectrum, we identify as queer, I identify as queer. It's okay to use that word, but what's not okay is to look at somebody and say you're a queer rather than you're queer. Because nobody wants to be called a derogatory term, and in that terminology, it's derogatory. Next slide, please. Transgender refers to somebody who is across the gender spectrum. So trans is the Greek word for cross. Transgender is somebody who identifies differently than the gender they were assigned at birth. So when you're born, the doctor picks you up, looks at you and says, it's a boy, it's a girl, slaps you on your butt and then puts you into, and that's what you're assigned as for the rest of your life. But people like me don't identify that way. I knew very early, as I said, that I was not male, and so transgender is a word to describe me as somebody who was identified as male at birth, was assigned male at birth, but identifies as female. Dead name, you heard that term used in there. Before I was Rachel Clark, my name was different. I changed it to align with my gender identity. Actually, what I did is I went to my mom and I said, what name would you like for me? And she said Rachel, so that's what it became. And I don't ever tell anybody what my name was before. It's a part of my life that I didn't live, I didn't know. It's a part I barely can identify with at all. It felt like I was acting in a 40-year play. It just seemed like it was never going to end. And I really don't want to relive that part of my life, so I don't use it. There's no purpose to it whatsoever. To me, I was always Rachel, and always will be. So even when I was 2 years old, although I had a different name that society knew me about, I was always Rachel. So for me, that's the importance of that. Cisgender, on the other hand, means that you identify as the sex you were assigned at birth. So if the doctor picked you up and looked at you and said, she's a girl and you identify as a woman today, you're a cisgender person. Cis is just the Latin term for the same. So a lot of people I talk to say they don't understand it. Cisgender simply means the same, that you identify the same as you were identified at birth. One more. Polyamorous. As we go through our evolution of gender, sexuality, and gender diversity. There are people who are polyamorous, and really what that means is that I'm okay with being in a relationship with anybody, whether they're transgender, cisgender, whether they're gay, straight, bisexual. I am open to having relationships with everybody. And so you saw in the film that there's people there that identify as being polyamorous, but that's what that term means, and you'll hear a lot of people use that now as how they identify themselves. I wanted to bring up something important. She used the word normal a lot in the video. This is really hard because, I mean, I think I'm normal. I have a job. I have a partner who's actually a minister in the United Church of Canada, in Nobleton and Schaumburg. We have 2 dogs, a cat. We have 2 kids, 3 grandkids. Our Saturdays and Sundays are spent just as most everyone else's Saturdays and Sundays are spent. I mean, I look at myself and I say, my life couldn't be any more normal than anyone else. But the problem is that someone looks at me as who I am as a human being and say, well, she's not normal. You know, she's got something wrong with her. She's different, so she's not normal. I think that we have to stop equating normal as being something that defines who we are as human beings, because none of us are normal. Nobody. It's really, really key for me that normal could mean anything for anybody. And so I think for me, when I'm watching the film, that's the most important thing to talk about, is how we're using the term normal and how that may not be an inclusive term for everybody, right? So, so that's that. Stephen, I'd like to be able to ask you to ask me anything you'd like. There is no question that's off limits for me. I have heard everything. So you're not going to offend me, and if you do, I'll say you're being offensive. No, I won't. I really want you to feel open to ask me anything that you'd like to ask me. I'll answer anything. So Stephen's going to moderate that part for you. So do you have any questions for me?
And I'll give you this microphone. I'll give you this microphone to speak into.
There was an article in the most recent CPA journal about this person who was born a girl, female, but became male. And he finally decided he was going to come out and said, my name is Mike. And the whole article was about him, and the whole article was about how the firm embraced him in the role that he decided for himself.
Yeah, you're talking about Mike Cherney, who works at Deloitte, is a very, very good friend of mine, actually. Mike, as you can imagine, Bay Street wasn't always a welcoming place for people like me and Mike. You know, I don't think 10 years ago I could have been hired at TD, nor Mike at Deloitte. It was a very different situation, but what I think TD and Deloitte and other companies are starting to realize is that customers don't want to do business at companies that don't represent their personal values. And when you see a bank or a financial institution or any company that doesn't represent the diversity of who we are as a people, it's a business loss leader for them. And so companies are now starting to rearrange their corporate structures to make sure that not only a diversity between men and women, but that sexual and gender minorities, people of color are all represented within the corporate fabric to do that. Mike is a very wonderful, amazing human being who I'm proud to have as one of my very close friends. So thank you for asking that.
So glad you're speaking. I wanted to ask you further about pronouns, because
I think it's easier when you meet someone to get that straight right off the bat, like, so nice to meet you, what's your pronoun? Does that sound like the right question to ask, or how would you sort of, rather than wait to make a mistake, you know, to be welcoming, to say that first?
That's a great question.
So I'm very uncomfortable being the person as a trans person who's probably visibly a trans person to go to people and say my pronouns are she and her. But what is really great though is when I'm in a room and somebody says my pronouns are she and her, then I feel comfortable in telling them. So maybe to just flip that around a little and say my pronouns are she and her. One of the things that we're doing at the bank is all of our bank tellers now are going to get name tags that have their pronouns on them. So you'll go to the bank and you'll see Joe Smith, and it will say him, her, him, he on his lapel. That way you can open up space for a conversation, I think. The reason that I don't like to do that as a trans person is because right away it puts me in a position of being lesser, right? Right away, I'm like, I'm the trans person in the room, I'm she and her, I've identified myself, I've outed myself to you. And it's probably pretty clear that I'm a trans person anyway, but I don't want to be the initiator of that conversation. So when cisgender people come and they say my pronouns are she and her, it's so great to hear that and so welcoming to me that I feel a lot more comfortable to do that.
First of all, thank you.
You're welcome.
The they and them, tricky still for me. If I was to say, so if someone's they and them, and then I'm shocked and say, and they say, who helped you today? And I say, it was that woman over there. But if they're they and them, what's that?
I try to be as gender neutral as I can in every situation. So I always say that person, that cashier, that clerk, that person. You know, I think as we get more and more in a more diverse culture and a more diverse world, we're going to see a lot of changes where people don't outwardly identify. There are a lot of people, a lot of trans people who look exactly like me, or, you know, visibly trans people who you would expect that their pronouns would be she and her, and you go to them and they say, no, my pronoun is they. They just feel like today they want to look more feminine. That's the gender expression that they have. In the Canadian Human Rights Code and here in Ontario, in the Ontario Human Rights Code, gender identity and gender expression are protected classes. So we as a society, we're not allowed to discriminate against someone whose on their basis of their gender identity and gender expression. What that means is that if I want to come to work and I want to dress as a guy, for some reason I wouldn't, but if I wanted to dress as a guy, I can without being persecuted for it. If Stephen wanted to come dressed as female to work, he could without being persecuted for it. It's not allowed anymore in our country, which is a wonderful and great thing. So I think, I don't know if that answers the question per se, but yeah. There's a lot of people who just express their gender, and it may vary from day to day. So that's why those laws were made. Nobody asked me why I'm 6'2".
No? Hello. When I grew up, I understood there was, I guess, what was sort of visible to I grew up in the 80s.
Me too.
So there was, is there a difference between a trans person and a person who had the surgery to totally become physically, in your case, a woman? And is there, do we make distinctions of that today, or is that as prevalent?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we used to make distinctions, and the reason why is because There was a period of time in very recent history where in order to be affirmed by the government that you're a trans person, you had to have surgery and be able to prove it. And until that time, you were not allowed to come out. So if my name was Steve before I came out, it wasn't, by the way. But if it was Steve before I came out, all of my ID would say Steve, even though I've been living as Rachel for 20 years. And they wouldn't change it unless I had surgery. The issue with surgery, as you can imagine, for both men and women, is that it's sterilization. So what the government was participating in was a scheme to sterilize trans people. Still, all over this world, trans people are required to get surgery in order to be affirmed as transgender people and given equal rights and privileges under the law. Japan is the most recent example of that. So there's a lot of talk about why trans people need to be sterilized to be affirmed under the law as trans people. The law's changed now. So now you don't have to have surgery in order to be affirmed by the government, at least here in Canada, as a trans person. I'm able to change my birth certificate, my driver's license, my health card. I could do all that without having any surgery whatsoever. Back in the 80s when we grew up, there was terms like transvestite and transsexual. We don't use those terms anymore. You'll hear some older trans people refer to themselves as transsexual. Transsexuals mean that they're someone who hasn't had surgery yet, usually. But for the most part, people just refer to themselves as trans, T-R-A-N-S, and that's it. So you'll hear, I'm a trans person, they're a trans person, they're a trans person. The other term is non-binary, which means I don't identify as either male or female, or identify as male or female. And I think that's an important distinction. Does that make sense? Transvestite, we don't use that term anymore.
I think this should be our last question.
I'll stick around afterwards if you want to ask me more questions, for sure. I've got all day, I've got nothing to do. I have normal stuff to do.
Again, we're going through these changes, and we're all getting used to these changes, and certainly a trans person working in a bank or Deloitte or whatever, or industry, I don't want to say that's an easy transition. What's your opinion on sport? Because we've got some issues or some challenges right now that you've got trans people who are participating in a sport against, well, I'm going to be careful here, against women.
Yeah.
But that trans person has maybe the physical stature of a man.
Yeah,
what's your opinion on that?
That's a great question. You're probably not going to like my opinion. No, I'm kidding. There are two people I want to bring your attention to. One person's name is Caster Semenya. She is a sprinter out of Africa. The other one's name is Duty Chand. Duty is a sprinter out of India. Both of them are cisgender identified females, but because they have higher levels of testosterone in their body, they're able to compete at a higher level and they win almost every race that they're in. I think as we're getting through the science of understanding what physiology changes are made in trans people, what we're finding out is that trans diversity happens even to people who don't identify as trans. So Caster Duty Chan, for example. In terms of trans women, which is typically what this discussion is about, there's a lot of research about what hormone replacement therapy does to your body. Trans people, trans women especially, they lose a tremendous amount of muscle mass. It's very hard to compete. I can tell you that I am nowhere near as strong as I used to be. I'm much weaker. It's much harder to keep fat off of my body. I have to work out twice as hard. I have to work twice as hard. So what I would say is, I think this science is still out on that, but from what I know from trans people who are athletes who I know and care about, I just know their commitment is twice as much as anyone else, just because they have to work so much harder to get there. And so I would just say that I hear you and understand where you're coming from. I just know that it's not as black and white as I think we think it is, and that, you know, there's an opportunity to think about that some more. So I hope that helps. Great, awesome.
Well, I think Rachel's given us. Look, I think Rachel's given us a lot to think about, and thank you for offering to be around after the service.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
Fantastic. And I can get